Everybody, welcome to Drive Through Review 728. Today we're going to talk about World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, and this is a pandemic system game. So it's based loosely on the pandemic system, which there's been several iterations of. And obviously this takes place during the World of Warcraft video game, during the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, which I think was the second expansion for the game. There's not really much to tell you other than that. That's kind of the short of it. It's a pandemic style game set in this universe. It plays 1 to 5 players. Let's jump down to the table. I will give you kind of the overall gist of how the game works, very much like Pandemic, and then we'll come back here and we'll do the review part. Okay, so you can see I have the game set up here, and this is actually kind of midway through a game, and this is actually set up to play as a solo game. So you can see down here, if you're playing solo, you will control 3 different characters, but you will only have a single hand of cards. Whereas in, I believe, every previous pandemic game, if you wanted to play solo, you'd control 2 or more characters and just maintain different face-up sort of hands of cards for each of the different characters that you were driving. I think this is the first one that has sort of a strict solo mode, and so it does work slightly differently for the solo gameplay. And really the only difference is that you have a single hand of cards, and the way that you contribute to quests and whatnot is all driven by that single hand. There's not really any other player to sort of cooperate with and do quests together with. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, that is actually how you win the game. So there are going to be different quests here on the board, and you can see there's 3 different colors. So here we've got a red quest, the Nexus, Utgard Keep, and then up there is a yellow one, which I just have face down pretending like I've finished it. So once you've finished all 3 of these quests, you will then unlock the Ice Crown Citadel here. You'll flip this one up here, and then you'll have to finish kind of this final big boss quest right there. Now each of the different quest locations, if we look here, this is the Nexus, you'll mark that spot on the board with one of these little colored tokens, so we know where to go, kind of go find that, and that's where we're going to take our quest action with our different characters here. Now in addition to doing that, you'll want to sort of stave off all of the different ice ghouls and things like that that are out here, and you also have these larger ones, these big abominations, and you can see up there is the Lich King up at the top of the screen there, and he'll kind of move around into these different colored spaces. So if he kind of moves to the purple area, he'll just live here, and he'll basically just kind of add damage to different combats and quest effects based on which sort of colored region he is. And then eventually he'll end up going to the Citadel here, and once you've completed all 3 of the different colored quests, this will actually come off the board. We'll flip this over, kind of becomes like a little arena or sort of raid type of combat here. He'll live there, and then he'll apply his damage on top of the quest damage here for the Ice Crown Citadel over there. And other than that, it's basically typical sort of pandemic ideas with some twists. So you'll have these different characters, and these are just some examples of the different minis there that you can do, and these are different characters in the World of Warcraft universe. And so you can take actions to move around. Each character gets 4 actions, so moving is an action. During the course of the game, these little strongholds will come out. I'll explain how those work in a minute. But basically you put a stronghold out, and you can go from anywhere on the board to a stronghold. So if I'm way over here somewhere, I can, for an action, take that and fly, theoretically on my magical griffin to get there. You can also do combat. So if my dwarf character was in this particular spot, he could do combat with these abominations or any number of ghouls that are there. And then if you're in a quest location, you can also do a quest action. And of course, each of the different characters has different special abilities. On the back here, it will tell you their starting area right there. And they'll have different health point trackers. It's different per different players here. So Sylvanas here, she has 6, whereas Varian over here, he's got 7. And then the dwarf over here, he's got 8, and so on. But they have different kind of special abilities to make up for that. And then you have the cards and things that you're going to play, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But let's talk about combating and questing. So let's just set up a little example over here on this spot. And let's say we want to do a combat here against these 2 ghouls. So you're always going to roll 2 dice here in combat, and you're going to be looking for various different symbols. So the symbols are either going to have 1 or more of these fists. These are always success icons, or these shields. So you're going to do damage equal to the number of fists, and then block damage equal to the number of shields, obviously. So if we go back to our example here, we've got 2 fists and 1 shield. So in this case, each of these ghouls takes 1 damage, so this is enough to clear those off. But let's say we had a third ghoul there, then what would happen is we would be able to have enough to clear 2 off, but then any remaining ghouls or abominations, if we had an abomination here, would do 1 damage back to us. So the fist in this case would prevent 1 of those damages. So we'd have to take 1 damage and reduce that on our character sheet tracker in that case. Now if you want to kill an abomination, you've got to do 3 successes all at once. So if we had this kind of situation here, let's say we had an abomination there and the 2 ghouls, and we rolled 3 successes. Well, in this case, we'd have to either apply all 3 successes to kill the abomination, which is probably what you want to do, or we could apply 2 successes to kill the ghouls, but that 1 left over is not going to go on to the abomination and then persist to the next action, which we could take into another combat. You've got to do all 3 within the 1 action there. And then again, anything that's left there is going to apply 1 damage back to you, prevented by shields. And then if the Lich King is in your color zone, they're always going to add 1 damage to any combat. In this case, if the Lich King was over here in the little red zone marker there, in this case there, if we had rolled the 3 successes that we talked about, we would theoretically remove the abomination. We'd have 2 damage coming back to us, and then 1 more, again, because we have the Lich King down over here. So he's always going to beef that up. Now let's say we didn't want to fight these, we wanted to do a quest action here, and we have both these characters there. So let's say Sylvanas' turn, and she's going to do the quest action. So what she's going to do is also roll 2 dice, and then you're going to apply the number of successes in this case and move this little tracker along this tracker like that. And then you can also take and contribute up to 1 card per character that is there, and you can look and see, you know, what icons on the cards will actually work, because these cards have kind of a multi-purpose thing. So these have shields and then shoes, and there's also swords and things like that. So you can actually, each character there can apply an extra card, just 1 card, and then you can move it further along the track. And you can kind of apply those in different orders, so it kind of makes sense that you will move it further along. So if you want to say, well, I don't have any of these, let's say it was here, and I have, okay, I've got a couple of boots, so I'll apply those first and discard those cards, and then apply my successes after that. And then once you get to the end of each of these quests here, you're going to take and flip that over, and then you're going to get a special card as kind of like a reward. And these are like the really special cards in Pandemic, and these are, you can play these at any time. They do really cool effects. So you'll be able to get 3 of these over the course of the game there. And then again, once you do all 3 quests, you go to the Ice Crown Citadel and complete that quest, and then win the game. And like I said, you've got some different styles of cards here. You're going to be looking at these icons here to help you progress the different quests, but you also want to keep these and use them for different things. So here, this one, it says prevent 2 damage to any hero on your space. So if you're fighting or someone's fighting on your space, or they're questing, then you can prevent the damage that comes back. Well, I didn't say here about the quest, I should say, is the quest will do this much damage right there in the middle, and +1 if you have the Lich King after you do your quest action. So they're always going to be fighting kind of back at you anyway. So these shields are going to come in super handy for preventing that damage. But again, you want to keep the shields to help you progress, you know, with their icon, but also keep them from, you know, having your characters die. And these travel cards, these allow you to move up to 2 spaces or different numbers of spaces for free based on the number there. They've got cards that will add to your fight. So these axes here, this will add successes to fighting. You've also got ones that will help you rest for a free action, and these will actually let you rest in a quest space, which you normally can't do. And I should say you can also take a rest action, just roll 2 dice and add the number of successes and heal that much. And so the cards have this dual purpose of helping you on quests, as also helping you kind of you know, get the rest of your job done in terms of combating the monsters and keeping them from spawning. So just like Pandemic, at the end of your turn, at the end of your 4 actions, you're going to draw cards out of this hero deck. You might draw a stronghold. If you draw a stronghold, then you will immediately put out one of those strongholds. And based on the difficulty, you'll shuffle a certain number of these into the deck. And then you have these Scourge Rises cards, which are sort of like the Epidemic cards. And that will advance this marker up here, as well as reset this deck where you draw the bottom card from the deck and so on, and then reshuffle it, and then you'll draw those ghoul cards again, and then it will spawn out different ghouls and things like that on the board. Now, instead of an outbreak like you have in Pandemic, let's zoom in here, you can have at most 3 ghouls. So if you draw a ghoul card and you're going to spawn a new one, instead of spawning that, you're actually going to spawn out one of these abominations there. And then after sort of the draw step of this, the abominations are actually going to move one space closer to the nearest hero. And then if they're in the same space as a hero, so which is this guy up here, then the abomination will just do 1 damage to that hero. Now, anytime that you have that sort of overrun, that outbreak concept, this despair track is going to move down 1 space. And if you ever cannot put out an abomination, there's only 3 of them, or you've used up all the ghouls and you can't put one out for each figure you can't put out, this will also start to move down. And if one of your characters goes back to 0 health, this is actually going to move down 2 steps, and then the character will kind of like respawn, but they'll have to discard all of their cards. And if this ever gets to the bottom, then you've lost the game. So you can lose the game kind of like getting overrun, you know, not taking care of your abominations, you know, having your characters kind of die carelessly and stuff like that. And of course, again, the way that you win is you get over here to the Ice Crown Citadel, complete that quest over here, and then basically defeat the Lich King. And that is the gist of the game. Okay, so that is the World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King game. Let's go through my pillars of review. Now, play count, I've only played this 2-player and solo. And like I said during the walkthrough, the solo is kind of like playing 3 players at once, but you have a single hand of cards. And I found that very cool to do this way. Now, I've soloed like regular games of Pandemic and other Pandemic games, and it works just perfectly fine. But I do like, in this case, the changes that they've made because of the way that the system works for solo play, where you have a single hand of cards. I'll talk more about that in the review, but it does work, I don't know, I think a little bit better as a solo game than a normal Pandemic game would, although I think that one works fine. As far as the other player counts go, I don't think it should matter too much. It will probably tweak the difficulty level a little bit based on number of players, because after each player, you know, you're drawing new cards, you're activating the ghouls, and so, but theoretically the players have more actions because there's more of you and stuff like that, so it shouldn't matter too much. I would happily play this with at 5, I think. I haven't tried it, but I think it would be fine. I don't think you would be disturbed or anything playing a different player count. So the player time, it's about an hour, I think. Let's see, I don't really think it's going much over an hour. Maybe with 5 you might hit an hour and a half or something, just because there'd be a lot of crosstalk at the table, but not really anything to do with the game, because you really have the same amount of actions in turns in a way, because you're going to be going through the deck, you know, that much quicker with 5 players, but everybody's getting a turn. So the player time should be about, I would say, 45 minutes to 90 minutes at most. Now, obviously, if I were to compare this to other games, it'd be most like a Pandemic game. I think this is probably my favorite or second favorite of kind of the Pandemic offshoots. There was one, I think it was called Fall of Rome, that I really liked that game. That was really cool how that game worked, and it was about kind of the Roman invasions and the fall of Rome and all that stuff, and trying to keep Rome up and running as the different nations were trying to invade Rome at the time. Really, really cool system. And I've liked a lot of these sort of spin-off ones. There was a Cthulhu one that was really cool. Each of them has made like just real minor tweaks to the system to keep it fresh. It's just a great system overall, so it's very easy to kind of adapt and sort of make tweaks to the different settings. This one, I think, is probably the biggest departure, because the way that you're dealing with the ghouls and stuff is not really like dealing with a disease or, you know, armies or, you know, even the Cthulhu monsters, the little demons there. There's a real sort of combat here, which they did have in the Rome one, but the way that the cards work, instead of sort of using the old like cure the disease system, the cards have a good dual purpose here, and I think that's what kind of is pushing it and elevating it up to kind of the top of my sort of favorite Pandemic spin-offs, is because you have the icons on the cards, which you need to sort of advance the quest, to kind of cure the quest, if you will. But those cards have that dual purpose of helping you out in combat, helping you in defense, helping you get around the board quicker. Because even those cards that allow you to move as a free action to, I think, up to 4 spaces, that can really come in handy, because you really need to get to a trouble spot where the ghouls are just getting out of control and the abominations are starting to come out. Because if you don't take care of the abominations, there's only 3 of them. Once you can't put an abomination on the table anymore because there's none out there, and that despair track starts dropping quicker and quicker, then you're in trouble. You're going to lose the game. So even those simple cards like that, or the simple card to heal as a free action and allowing you to heal on a quest base, that's a really vital thing, and you're going to be super tempted to use it. but then you want to hang on again to that icon to help you drive that quest tracker up. So the dual purpose side is really neat, and that really is kind of what sells the game for me, as far as like, setting it apart differently enough. The other part mechanically I'll talk about is the dice combat, the dice quest thing. And the cool thing about it, and this really reminds me of a game I reviewed earlier in the year called Altar Quest, which was like a dungeon crawler game. And in that game, there are no like complete misses on the dice. There's no blank faces or anything like that. So when you roll the dice, you're always getting something that's a little bit helpful. Now you might roll 2 shields and not get any successes in this case, but you're gonna like, okay, well, at least I'm not really taking any damage coming back to me on this quest or this combat. And so that's not really the end of the world. I mean, it stinks because you want to kill or advance the quest, but you're not just getting absolutely nothing out of it. And now preventing damage is a big deal, because if you're not really watching, I mean, damage can really stack up, and you don't want to have a character die because you could drop 2 spaces. So anyway, and so because of the way that works with the dice, and Altar Quest has a similar thing where if you don't get a success, you at least get like a success token for the next roll. So you still kind of get something out of it. And I really like how they did that with it. So you're not just rolling dice and going, well, that sucks. And then moving on, you're like, well, at least, okay, I got this for next time. At least I don't take any damage. So I can do another combat, easily. Because like if you do a bunch of damage or, advance the quest tracker really far, but maybe it's one of those quests that can deal a lot of damage to you, because the quests all have like different abilities. So sometimes they'll like, do different things, or they'll spawn an abomination when you finish it or whatever. And some of them are just like a lot of damage. So you might advance the quest tracker 4 spaces, but you're like, oh, well, I'm taking 4 damage back, and so I should never do this again until I heal. And so getting the shields and stuff is really helpful. So the dice system and then the new card system are really kind of the 2 mechanical things. Theme-wise, it does some interesting stuff. So I will just sort of put this sort of caveat out there. It's a very specific theme. So it's World of Warcraft, which is fine, and it's also like Wrath of the Lich King, which is, I don't really know. Is that like a niche within a niche of the Warcraft universe? I'm not really sure, but to me, that was the time actually where I played the World of Warcraft game the most. I had like 4 or 5 level 80s at that time, which was the max level back then. So I was like really like, oh, neat, this is cool. And I could see some of the familiar locations, the Argent Tournament and Naxxramas and all these. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And some of the stuff is like kind of thematically interesting how it works. I'm like, that kind of makes sense based on how I remember that raid being or something. And how the Lich King, how you kind of would do the raid ladder or whatever up to the Lich King and stuff. And I was like, this is pretty cool. So I think if you were like a big fan of World of Warcraft back then, but that was like, how long ago was that? That was like 10, 15 years ago. I'm not really sure. It was a while ago. So I'm like, now it's coming out now. So I don't know. It's just kind of a curious thing. So I know there's probably still lots of World of Warcraft fans out there. I mean, there were millions of players even back then, especially. So it just seems it's a very strange kind of targeted thing, which is specific to that. So if you weren't really into Wrath of the Lich King, I'm not sure how you could get into it, but I think you could come at this and play it without being into Warcraft at all. I think if you just are kind of generally into the fantasy style games, this is a cool kind of vibe here. And one thing it does remind me a lot of is actually the Defenders of the Realm game, which is also kind of much more loosely based off the Pandemic system. It got a lot of inspiration out of the Pandemic system. And I don't think you can find that game in print anywhere. And a lot of the things that this game does kind of reminds me of that, because you have that sort of cooperative thing where the players were sort of team up, and this is another really cool mechanical aspect, but also thematically as well. Whereas if you kind of gang players up into a quest space, they can each contribute a card to advance that. So having the players sort of, or at least having that sort of stress on the players to either group up and get this quest done, or spread out and start to tamp down these fires of these ghouls and abominations that are spawning. That's a real good, back and forth in the decision-making process of like, what should we do? What should we do? And so having that sort of teamwork aspect mechanically and also through the theme come through is just a really fun, beneficial part of playing the game. It just really makes the game a lot more fun. Having the teamwork itself sort of physically manifest itself on the table by what you're doing, instead of just sort of discussing and cooperating and agreeing on a thing. It's like you're through the mechanics of the cards and all of the physical activity, that actually the teamwork actually represents itself on the table there. So that's cool. That's neat. I do feel like, okay, I did one other thing, kind of a two-part thing. The difficulty level, there's 4 difficulty levels. There's kind of an intro, and then a normal, and then an expert, and then like insane or something. And so I went right to the normal, beat that easily twice, and it was really kind of no thought. Then I ratcheted up to the expert, and that to me was kind of the sweet spot. I haven't tried insane because I've lost the expert enough to get to that sort of perfect win rate. So you want to win like a third of the time, usually when you play a co-op. Just to kind of make sure that the difficulty seems well balanced. So you still have a chance, but the game's still probably going to win. And that's kind of that perfect sweet spot. So I will say that I did feel like normal was like a little easier somehow than like the normal on other pandemic games. But it's not really an issue. I think it just seemed like on the normal, you could more easily ignore the ghouls because of the pace that they sort of come out, and that the Scourge cards would sort of respawn the ghoul deck. That seemed like a little bit slow for me. But again, that makes it easy to play it with families and kids and stuff like that. So you can kind of, work your way up into that. And so they have that difficulty built into the game and the scaling, and that allows you to kind of grow strategically and everything with the game. So I think that's actually a good bonus, but I would just kind of throw a little bit of warning there. So like, I think it's a little easy on normal. So you might, if you're, an experienced pandemic player, especially, just ratchet the thing right up to expert. The other thing is, I feel like there's an expansion in there, and I'm not sure that it needs it. So I've played it 5 times now, and I still would like to play it some more. I think I'll still get some fun out of it. But I feel like there should be an expansion for it. I don't know that it absolutely needs it. I think you could get some more varieties in some of the different quests, obviously some more characters. The Ice Crown Citadel quest is always the same, and maybe that's just kind of my initial reaction to that being like, oh, there's only the one end quest. This is like, so I don't really know that that's a problem, because by the time that you get to that, especially if you play an expert, there's a lot of stuff going on. Like, you barely got to that 3rd quest, and now you're really trying to race down that last one. So I don't really know that there needs to be any more difficulty baked into that. I think there might be probably some tough design decisions if they tried to add more to the game and then try to keep the difficulty scaling all through the different difficulty levels. I mean, I wouldn't want to try doing that. But I feel like there could be more here to sort of flesh out the world or something, like a different set of ghouls or something that had different abilities. Like, it's just, because it really reminds me of Defenders of the Realm. Like, to me, I'm like, oh, because that game has so many different like expansions and modules and things that you can throw at it, and to really it just really brings the theme of the game out. I think this has a lot of room for that. So I really hope that they do that, and they can hopefully do a good job of that. Again, I feel like just after playing it, I'm always like, man, there could be so many other cool things, but I also wouldn't want to water it down so much, because it's kind of like this perfect sort of balance between, really sort of traditional sort of pandemic thing going on, with enough kind of variation stuff, but also still like simple enough that like families could get into it and play it. And even like as a solo game, it's a good thing to like sit down and knock out in like 45 minutes and still be really rewarding and everything at the end. And it really kind of reminds me of, this probably wouldn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but it reminds me as if Prospero Hall got a hold of the pandemic license and they were able to do a game for it, because Prospero Hall is folks that have done lots of games for Ravensburger and Funko Pop and all these different kind of things, and then their own imprint. And those folks seem to have a really good sense of the kind of the perfect balance of a family game, gateway game kind of idea, but also still having some of those gamer, type of elements that'll really kind of reward that extra sort of strategic thinking. And that's kind of where this one sort of fits in, right? It sort of fits right in that kind of perfect ballpark of like, there's a lot of cool strategic decision making, but it's so easy and everything to sit down and play that a family could sit down and play it and kind of work their way up through the different difficulty levels. So this is kind of right in that ballpark. All right, anyway, that's a Wrath of the Lich King. Take a look at it. Thanks.